thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you to everyone that helped organize this conference. I'm really glad that we all get a chance to speak and that you get a chance to learn from us and learn with us. So for my master's thesis, I translated and analyzed an amulet from the Cairo Genizah. It is an amulet in Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and it is composed of 3 Genizah fragments, one of which we have in our collection here. It's in the exhibit case. And the other 2 are at Cambridge University Library, which I had the pleasure of visiting last summer on a research trip, sort of. And this is me with the 2 fragments. If you've never been to the Genizah Research Unit, this is how they store their fragments, which is actually pretty interesting. They're sewn into some sort of transparent plastic thing and put into these folders. It's great. Recommend going if you have the chance. But the amulet is made of HUC 1035 and Cambridge's TSK 1.166 and TSAS 142.256. Those latter 2 are available for viewing on the Friedberg Genizah project, but I do not have images of them in this presentation. So all the images you'll see are from HUC 1035. So the fragment is from the Cairo Genizah, which the amulet was probably found in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo, but there were other Genizahs in Cairo that were kind of grafted into the Genizah collection. So it could possibly be from another one. The join of these 3 fragments, the recognition that these are all part of the same original document, was made in 2008 by Professor Dr. Ortal Paz-Saar, who is now a professor at HUC University in the Netherlands, but it was during her doctoral work at the Tel Aviv University. And if you go to the next slide. The amulet was written to protect Eliyahu ben Esther from demons, the evil eye, and sickness, among other things, and to bless Eliyahu ben Esther with commercial success and health. Amulets are they're a representation of sympathetic magic, which is magic intended to change something about the world. And the way that this amulet does these things is through invocations, through statements of its goals, and then those are undergirded with magic signs and scripture and adjurations of angels and divine names, and then also seals, which are in one of the Cambridge fragments. And next slide. When we look at Jewish magic as it is present in the Cairo Genizah, we see a heavy influence of Islamic magic, but it also reflects the traditional and conservative nature of magic traditions, in that magic was perceived as something that had to be done very exactly. And that led to very stable textual traditions. And you see medieval amulets that have very, very similar elements to 2nd century amulets. And throughout that time, and even up to modern amulets, like we have an amulet in the exhibit from Jerusalem in the 1880s, and it has many of the same elements that we see in this amulet. And there's also innovative qualities to magic. So it's not just the same thing for thousands of years. There are several things that I was very surprised by in this amulet. Part of that innovation is textual weaving. So there were textual sections in the amulet, and some of them we find from other sources. But the way that this writer of the amulet, we don't know who the writer was. It could have been Eliyahu ben Esther himself, or it could have been a professional magician or a scribe. It's not signed or dated, but yes. So the textual weaving is the use of different texts, which were originally created for different goals, to undergird and serve the purposes of the amulet and serve the beneficiary of the amulet's power. Good. So these are on the right. These are the sections of the amulet, roughly. And under them, I have the types of texts that are utilized in these sections. The Basmala, we'll get to that in a second. There are 3 larger Arabic refuge sections in which the amulet invokes the protection of God, the refuge of Eliyahu ben Esther in God from a bunch of different things. And that weaves in Quranic quotations, a prayer I found in an early hadith in the book Al-Muwatta, and the Halqala, which is another Arabic statement that's common in Islam. And there's also a Hebrew commerce section, which is very interesting in that it seems to have been drawn from a magical handbook, part of which has survived in the Genizah, which we will talk about in a moment. And there's also an Aramaic healing section, which includes a prayer that is also found in the Siddur of Sajjah and also in the Brit Milah section. And it's also present in the Brit Milah of modern Yemeni Siddurs. Interesting. Next. Right. So most of the innovation we see in this amulet is present in the Arabic sections. The Hebrew and Aramaic sections are, by and large, very, very formulaic and show clear evidence of that conservative magical tradition. And the Arabic sections seem to be a bit more fluid and less reliant on previous texts. There's a lot more transitional language in those, which I think could indicate a much greater proficiency with Arabic from this amulet creator than with Hebrew and Aramaic, but that is speculative. Next. So the basmala is a ubiquitous phrase in Islam. It's in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. It begins the amulet. It also begins, and from what I've seen, most Islamic documents of significance. It also is the beginning of every surah chapter of the Quran, but it's only counted as an ayah, a verse in the first one. So I have the text of the first surah of the Quran here. One interesting thing is that you see that there would be an alif as the second letter of this, but that is not written in this. It's sort of a unique form of the word, but there is an alif in the amulet, which is odd. There are surviving Quran manuscripts written in Judeo-Arabic, which is Arabic written in the Hebrew script, that have survived without the aleph. So that's interesting. So next. The next section, the next Quranic quotation that I found is Al-Falaq, which is the 113th surah of the Quran. The 113th and 114th surahs of the Quran are ubiquitous in Islamic magic. They are a passage in which the prophet receives a prayer from the angel Gabriel to protect him from aggressive magic from his enemies in Mecca. And this is interesting that it's used here because the enemies are traditionally understood to be Jews, and this is used to protect a Jew from the evil of those who blow on knots, which is a form of witchcraft, it's believed, and the evil of those who envy. So yeah, the prayer from Al-Muwatta is also protection from aggressive magic by Jews. So that was something that I found very interesting, but I wasn't quite sure what to do with, because this is very evidently an amulet created for a Jewish person, but it uses these quotations from things protecting from Jewish magic. All right, we can go to the next. And the next citation is from An-Nur, which is the 24th surah of the Quran. This says, "Surely my Lord is over all things supreme and over all straight paths." Well, the passage in An-Nur actually says, "Surely God," but if we look at HUD, which is the 11th surah of the Quran, it says, "My Lord." So there could have been a sort of conflation of those two passages that put Rabbi instead of Allah there. And this is used at the end of the first fragment as sort of a section ender. It's before some graphic elements and then a Hebrew acronym. Each of the three sections of the amulet end with a Hebrew acronym after some drawings or magic signs, however you want to define those. You can see that on the amulet over there. There will be some on the last slide as well. All right. And the next text is from Arad 13. This is perhaps used to accompany angels' names in Islamic magic because the text in the amulet reads, these are the successive angels from before him and from behind him, and they will protect him at God's command. This comes 14 lines before the first mention of an angel's name in the amulet. So it is probably connecting the angels that are known already from Jewish magic to this Islamic tradition of angels surrounding God, and it also positions the angels that the amulet discusses as beneath the authority of God and acting under God's command. One interesting thing is that this, we go back to the word Allah in line 34 is a downstroke, which I initially thought was a final nun, and followed by a swirl sort of shape. But I found that that actually represents the name of God, because this quote and the next quote both have that shape, and it fits into the quotations as the word Allah, which is a fun, innovative graphic element. All right. And the final Quranic quotation that I discovered in the amulet was from Al-Buruj, which is the 85th surah of the Quran. And it says, this is the most shocking quotation that I found. It says, God encompasses them on all sides. In fact, this is the glorious Quran preserved on a tablet. It took me a while to find this translation, but to understand what this passage was saying, because of the difficulties of transcribing Judeo-Arabic into Arabic and then trying to find the passage in the Quran. But this actually does appear in another amulet from the Cairo Genizah that I found, but that amulet is, it seems to be a fully Islamic amulet. It doesn't seem to have any Jewish influence. It's a block printed Arabic amulet, and this ayah is handwritten into the margin, which is interesting. I'm not entirely sure what this mention of the Quran is doing, but as far as I understand it, is invoking the power of the Quran that was understood in the popular culture. All right. So those are the Quranic quotations that I found. This is I grabbed a text of one of the quotations, but yeah. And moving on to the biblical quotations. Interestingly, all of the biblical quotations in the amulet occur in the same textual unit, and that unit is also found in a magic recipe book, which is in the Taylor Schechter collection at Cambridge, the new series 2246.32, and also in an amulet, which is understood to be a finished product following that recipe, which is Taylor Schechter K1.152. Both of these have been published before, but they appear with very similar texts. There are some slight differences. So this is an interesting example where a magical recipe book, which is sort of like a spell book, if you will, we have a record of it actually being used. And the differences between the present amulet and the other completed amulet indicate that it could have been a more widely shared recipe book, because the text is significantly more different in the present amulet than the other two Genizah fragments that have similar texts. But moving on to the quotations that are in it, here we have Isaiah 10:14. This is a passage describing the wealth of Assyria and their capital success. My hand found like a nest, the wealth of all nations. This is the translation of the amulet, not the biblical text. All of these translations are from the amulet. There are a few slight differences of person or word swapping that occur from the biblical and Quranic texts, but I chose to just include the biblical quotes. Yes, so this the use of this in the other amulet that I discussed earlier does specifically say that this is for commercial blessing, for success in business for the recipient of that amulet. So we can assume that this is also to bless Eliyahu ben Esther in his business dealings in Cairo. And the next section connects the recipient of the amulet to Joseph, which is very, very common in Jewish magic. Joseph and Noah, which are the two people in Genesis, two of the people at least in Genesis that are specifically identified as having favor from God. And it could also be connected to the idea of the evil eye, because the Talmud says in two places that the seed of Joseph is exempt from the evil eye. So this could be part of that protection from the evil eye that is mentioned earlier in the amulet. But you see here, Joseph found favor in the eyes of God. What's interesting about this is that in Genesis, this passage is referring to Potiphar's eyes, not God's. So we see here the flexibility of these texts as they're reused, as they're taken from the source text and put into here. The amulet maker felt some flexibility. And the power that the scripture had in its original form seems to have been understood to be maintained even with these slight changes. And the next verse is also from Genesis. It's from 2 verses earlier, actually. Very simple, and Adonai was with Joseph. The names of God in the amulet are very, it doesn't use the same name twice, except for once. It says El Shaddai, Tzabaot twice, but that I believe is to sort of a covering your bases using all the names of God, because the name of God is so powerful that using multiple will evoke as much power as you can. And both of these quotations from Genesis are followed by so as Joseph did, so may Eliyahu find favor, and as he was with God, as he was with Joseph, may he be with Eliyahu ben Esther. And those are all the biblical quotations in the amulet, but there was one more in the magical handbook in the amulet. There was a verse from the Noah story that said Noah found favor, and I believe that could have been left out of this because there are 2 chets right before and after that verse, so I believe that the scribe could have jumped and skipped that accidentally. But I wanted to note that there were more in the source text. All right. Oh, I missed one. Let me go back to that. There's also a verse from the Psalms. The Psalms are very common in Jewish magic, although this is the only one. There is another amulet written for Eliyahu ben Esther that is preserved in the Moseri collection, and it also has a verse from the Psalms in it. That is the only verse used in that amulet, interestingly. And that is a different hand. It's written on parchment. This is written on paper. It's a very different amulet than this, but they were both written for someone named Eliyahu ben Esther. And also, the being referred to by your mother's name is very common in magic. It is the standard way to refer to someone in Jewish magic, medieval Jewish magic at least. But this line says, he goes about on the wings of the wind, a very pretty verse, but in the Psalms it refers to God, and in the amulet it refers to the angel Keruviel. I don't know how that name is supposed to be vocalized, but I'll say Keruviel so that I can pronounce it. So this is another example of the flexibility of the textual reuse here, how things that aren't referring to God in the original can refer to God, and things that are can not. But this, again, is part of, this wasn't the innovation of this scribe. It was part of an existing magical tradition, which is evident in the magical handbook and the other amulet. All right. So in this amulet, we find elements of innovation and also elements of a conservative magical tradition. Next slide, there we go. The conservative elements are the use of the Bible. These are very standard biblical quotations and characters to evoke in Jewish magic that have been evoked since the Jewish magical tradition began to be a textual one around the 3rd century of the Common Era. But there are also elements of Islamic influence, which obviously did not appear in magic until the rise of Islam, and until Islamic magic developed its own tradition. As we can see from the Quran quotes and the Hadith quotes, as well as this magic square, which we know did not enter into the magical tradition until there was influence from Islam. This is actually an unusual square. Normally they are actually square, but this is a rectangle. And these are very unusual symbols. I had great difficulty trying to understand some of them, but I found at least a reference for most of them, but I wasn't able to make any semantic meaning from it. And that's something that we encounter a lot in these amulets, because they don't come with guidebooks. They're just the text itself, and you can compare it with other things, but it is often very difficult to tease out the meaning of these things. And the innovation that we saw was the textual weaving, the use of these texts in different ways than they were originally intended, but to undergird the power of the amulet and to bring about the change in the world that the amulet aims to bring about. So I will open it up to questions now. Yes, Dr. Sayers.
A couple of things. So you remarked on the abbreviation of Allah as the downstroke and then the squiggle.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, in the same way that you have forms of the tetragrammaton that are abbreviated, whether you find that same abbreviation, whether you could find that same abbreviation in Arabic amulets or other Arabic writings, where it's just one abbreviates the divine name.
Yes. So the question was, are there similar abbreviations of the divine name of Allah in Arabic magic? Yes. I have found some ways that Islamic magicians have been creative with the name of God. Arabic writing is a very flexible writing system, and it's able to be used in a lot of interesting visual ways. And there was one example I saw where they made a magic square, but they had the aleph over here, and then the lam, and then the lam, and the hay was on that side. So there was comfort, at least among some people, in playing with the form of the name of God. And that, I believe, is what we see here. And there are a lot of different forms of the tetragrammaton. There are just a hay with 2 marks on the side of it. There's yod, vav, yod. There's ya. There's aleph, hay. There's a lot. And Dr. Kaufman?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is obviously a Judeo-Arabic amulet.
Yes.
You've given us the citation, but what about the non-citation material, or is it all citation?
Do you mean, are there
other, is there material that's not citation from known magical texts?
Yes. The question is, is there material in the amulet that is not a citation of a known text? Yes, there are.
And it's in what language?
There are Arabic sections and Hebrew sections. I don't believe there are any Aramaic innovative original texts.
Is there a particular pattern for which the Hebrew is used?
It's hard to say. I believe that the Arabic sections show more original creation than the Hebrew. Most of the Hebrew sections are either from liturgy, or they are from the Bible, or they make, they're a lot more formulaic, it seems to me, than the Arabic. But I also have less familiarity with Arabic, so that could just be my automatic perception. That's a great question, and that's something I should look into. Evan?
Yeah, I was gonna ask this might be out of the purview of your research, but did you discover any magical formula that relied upon what we see in the Greek magical papyri from an earlier time, like were there stock phrases or pieces of formulas that you could be like, oh, this probably stems from the Greek magical papyri?
I didn't find any. Oh, the question was, are there any elements of Greek magical papyri that are present in this amulet? I didn't find any textual elements from that. There are some sections that I wasn't able to decipher any meaning from at all, which I believe were either, they could have been a Greek transliteration. That's a common phenomenon. It happens. Sometimes the Greek also gets garbled enough that it's almost unrecognizable until you find a parallel text that's a little bit less garbled. That Gideon Bohawk talks about that in his book, Ancient Jewish Magic. But these symbols right here are sort of a representation of charactares, which are an element from Greco-Egyptian magic that made its way into almost all magical traditions in the medieval world. And they are present in a bunch of different sections in the amulet. So that is one way that Greco magic has made it in. Yes.
Take my question.
Mhm.
Since you've given us, I mean, when I think of the word amulet,
Mhm.
as a person who reads a bit, I think more of something that someone would be wearing.
Yeah.
Or something that would be hanging on a wall in a home to provide a sense of this is a sacred, this is our home, it's sort of sacred to us.
Yes, absolutely.
So you said that the amulet you examined, 1/3 of it, or a portion of it is physically here, you pointed to this sitting over there in the cabinet, so I have an idea of how large it is or how
Mhm.
long it is. And the 2 segments that you studied in Cambridge. So my question is, of all of this, what you talked about is like what percent of the whole thing?
Are you,
Like these segments that you brought out for your talk, your examination of it.
Mhm.
Is it 10%? Is it 25%? I mean, is there,
of this specific amulet?
Yeah.
The question is, what percentage of the entire amulet do the fragments I've examined represent? The amulet itself says that it's a triple amulet. So from that, I have come to believe that was originally in 3 parts. The third fragment is also has a blank space at the bottom, and the other 2 don't. This fragment as well has a different top than the other 2, the one that we have. So my belief is that it was originally 3 sections which are sewn together. There are needle holes on the bottoms and tops of each of the fragments. And
vertical?
yes, it was sewn together vertically. And I believe that it was rolled up. There are ink transfers on the backs of the fragments, which line up if you roll the amulet. But the text is a little bit lower on the back, like the transfer is a little bit lower on the back, so that shows that it would have been rolled. And it probably would have been rolled in a case, rolled and worn in a case around someone's neck or on a person somewhere. We have surviving leather and metal cases for amulets from this time period, so that's probably what it would have been. But I do believe that this is the full amulet, but because it is such an amalgamation of a lot of different things, it's possible that there could be fragments missing. And it would be difficult to ascertain that because each amulet does start with an introduction and end with an ending. So there could have been more.
Right?
Mhm.
So, I
Thank
know
you.
there might be more